Watch this. No way!
I'm looking for, that's pretty much sealed up now. I've been talking to the guy, a Scottish guy who's running a job in a far-flung place where it's a little bit concerning that I'll ever come back.
All to be announced.
Well, it's really strange, actually, because of late, well, not so much with the Israel thing, but that whole region is, you have to think about that now before you take these jobs. So, but obviously at the moment, you know, the main commitment for me, as you know, next year is back up to Castle Stewart Cabot. And that's a big year for us, massive push to be ready for 225.
It's a man of mystery. So we've got Mik Wells on the pod. Mik, how old are you?
I'm 62.
You don't look a day over 40.
It's a cool dude. Mik smells great. Did you notice when he came in? Is that Tom Ford you're wearing?
That's outrageous. But I wouldn't wear Tom Ford.
Well, what is it?
No, it's Check and Speak.
It's Check and Speak. I've never even heard of that.
Well, there you go.
You're a snazzy guy, actually.
I'm glad this isn't actually on footage.
You're the second person I'm going to accuse of looking like Sam's dad.
Oh, I feel like Sam's dad.
I've got basically a Sam doppelganger going on here. But we met you, Mik, up at Castle Stewart, up at Cabot Highlands, as it is now, and we were forced serendipitously into a room together. Someone shut the door.
I think I'd rather go with a cottage than the room, to be fair, Tom.
That was quite a nice couple of days, though, wasn't it? We
yeah, it was
enjoyed
good.
hanging out.
It was good. It was nice to meet you guys, and I think, you know, obviously the remit was to get out early. You know, you guys get out at sunrise, and we were out again at sunset. So I've always been an early riser. So it's
what was that? That was like May, wasn't it?
I think it was. Yeah,
May.
So it would have been quite early.
You were getting ready to break ground then, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Hadn't quite broken ground. And home's West Yorkshire?
North Yorkshire. Yorkshire. I've been in North Yorkshire for about 10 years. I came up again, did some work at Rockcliffe Hall, which is Durham Way or Darlington. And then I needed somewhere to stay, and I just ended up in this little village. It's got a great atmosphere.
It's beautiful up there, isn't it?
It is stunning. And
I was up there the other week. I played Crossland Heath, which is a bit, it's west of West Yorkshire.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I don't really know that. But
I mean, it's just the whole part of the world up there is just beautiful.
Well, it's close. I mean, you've got Ganton, one way, York, which is a great course, and then you've got Seaton, which is Seaton and Carew, and Cleveland, good links courses. So
if I said the name Mik Wells to someone and they didn't immediately know what you did and who you are, what do you do? How do you describe yourself?
Well, it's my career sort of morphed, really. I mean, I started as a greenkeeper, which I think is a really solid base for what I do now, because I've got a relationship with the guy ultimately that's got to look after what I create. So I'm now a golf course shaper, but I do consultancy work as well. So I get, for instance, course managers that know me from being a course manager, and they get in touch with him. Mik says, well, we're looking at doing some alterations in-house.
Yeah.
So I go down there and I give them an idea. Sometimes they've had an architect in, they get a price for a contractor, and some clubs can't afford it, so they go in-house, much like you've had yourselves at Blackwell.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously a lot of the architects have contractors that they trust, and they put them forward, and sometimes it's just too much. So then you get the greenkeeper. So I'm that in-betweener where I will go 9 times out of 10. I'll give them, you know, my sort of charge of consultancy rate. I go down there for the day. I tell them what they can and can't do, and what I would do. They'll tell me the plans that they've been given and what they're looking at, bunkers to be filled in, where to move them to, and I just give them ideas on height of face for fairway bunkers, for instance, you know, so you can get home if you're in the fairway side of the bunker, and if you can't, then a higher face on the.
So it touches on architectural principles as well as
I've studied
common
it.
Sense
I think that goes back. I mean, I was thinking about it when you asked me to do this, and sort of, you know, how did I get here? So I just left school and wanted to do something where I got a suntan. It appealed to me. While I had the qualifications.
You're not doing a very good job of that.
No. But my father wanted me to go into banking, and it wasn't for me. I've always had the outdoor thing, and I just think that when you're a greenkeeper, if you're the right sort of greenkeeper, you're in touch with what you're creating. You know, what you're looking after every day. And I can remember I've always had the eye for the shapes and everything else. And I just think that now I've got a situation where I go and help the greenkeepers. So I tell them what to do, and then sometimes, probably 30% of the time, they'll get in touch with me and they want me to do the work because I try and do a prolonged contract. So I'll go back to 4 or 5 golf clubs a year for a month, and I go for 6 years doing that work. And so that's my main bulk of the year. And the other sort of 6-7 months of the year is consultancy work, or sometimes, like next year I've got 6 weeks abroad, and I go and do that contract. And every time I have a new customer, someone looks at the work and it turns to open. I did one job in this area 7 years ago at Burton-on-Trent, and I got 7 jobs from that one job without advertising. So someone come and saw the digger working with the 360 knuckle, the bucket and everything else.
You've been on one of those before, haven't you, Tom?
No.
What were we on?
It was just you. Only you had a go.
You had a go on that. Yeah,
I was filming you have a go on your little digger.
It's absolutely
we've only
terrifying. Those things are so powerful.
We've only just filled that hole in, actually.
I think you smoothed it over in about 15 seconds. It took me an hour.
It was like watching a dad just kind of give his boy free rein of a car for the first time in a car park.
I'm getting a bit concerned about this father and son.
Can I not have, though, that I'm at least credited with some of the shaping at the new Tom Doak course at Castle Stewart?
Yes, I think the car park would be suitable.
Well, no,
it's quite rather bossy, though, isn't it? I think
you kind of you wiggled the bucket around.
I did move a bit of it,
and you did like a 360 in the machine.
I was going for some more sort of like Mackenzie style shaping. There was a lot more sharper edges.
Yes, I think when you shut your eyes, it became
it did, didn't it? If you closed one eye and you sort of just covered the left with the.
But that's another thing that Tom was saying. I mean, so. The height of my greenkeeping would have been, I started in the late 70s and I'd left it by 88. I'd gone into construction in 88 and I'd done 9 tournaments at Wentworth and Walton Heath. And that was a time when, for me, I thought golf lost its way slightly because I was brought up on a Colt course. I've been a course manager at a Mackenzie course since that period. And obviously I worked at Walton Heath, so you got Fowler and then you've got the triangle with Varden and Braid Taylor. So I was honed in that Heathland, heather in the bunkers.
Natural shape.
Yes, exactly.
Natural setting.
And for me, what changed it all, and this is, a lot of people won't agree with me, but this is what I think, is that Channel 4 got hold of the Masters, which again is a Mackenzie course. Everything was hatched up at that time. Everything was striped. It wasn't cut like it is now back into the nap with, 10 or 11 fairway mowers moving in one direction to keep the distance down. It was all hatched up, and all the fairway bunkers were tight mown all the way round, completely round. And then I started to see it at courses. I was working at Wentworth at the time, but lots of courses, with a few exceptions like Swinley Forest and New Zealand maybe, but even West Byfleet and places like that, they were cutting completely round the bunkers in the 80s. So the fairways got massively wide in the landing area where the bunkers were. You could hit the ball left of a left-hand side fairway bunker, and it had been cut round with a fairway, round the side.
But they call them fairway bunkers, don't they? They don't call them rough bunkers.
Yeah, but I think for me, what I've always liked is, I think the fairway bunker, unless it's typical Colt cross bunkers, which is another thing that's fading out. A lot of cross bunkers are being filled in because with the technology changing, they're now not in range. They're almost aesthetic bunkers that people are just knocking over. Single figure handicap is just knocking the ball straight over. Everyone gets obsessed with moving tees back. And that's where I now do what I do. So I get asked to go in and strategically even copy the bunkers that are there, but move them into the area that there's now common for, the landing areas. But for me, what happened then is I worked at heathland courses, which were, traditionally halved fairways, like links golf courses, like one side, dart the other. All of a sudden, it was diagonal hatching and Worplesdon, where I worked. You didn't
like that aesthetic as much?
For me, what it did was it did away with the natural habitat coming into the bunker. So for me, the art of what myself and other shapers do is we build a bunker that looks like it's always been there.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then that's where the niche market comes.
Was that always the goal? Because I suppose you're working on Cabot Highlands now, and the goal with that will be to make it look like a links that's been there for 100 years, even though it absolutely won't have been. But when I think you were involved in the Wisley with the construction.
Yes, I
work
was.
there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that's a course that looks like it sits in.
No,
so was
I
that
totally.
Always that? I suppose what I'm saying is, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we weren't looking as reverentially at the golden age designs because they were only 30 or 40 years old. So we probably thought we could do better.
You're exactly right. It's become in vogue again. For instance, recently I worked on the full construction at JCB, Lord Bamford, at Uttoxeter. And at that time, you're talking about when I was working for Southern Golf, we did Hanbury Manor, the Wisley, Oxfordshire, Warwickshire. Massive boom around the M25 of American investment, American architects, Trent Jones. You got to be careful what you say, but they're not my type of golf course. But I did work on them. Didn't so much do the shaping; it was more the finishing at that time.
Yeah.
It was when I went to Berlin in 1990. I was out there for nearly 4 years, and we worked with an architect, myself and Stuart McComb, and a few other guys that I know, all from the greenkeeping. We worked with from the greenkeeping industry. We worked with an architect in Germany called Kurt Roschnick.
Never heard of.
He was absolutely brilliant because what he did was he would take a field and he knew that halfway up that field he was going to have to put a set of tees in. And he didn't like to see flat lines on golf courses, so he would put a subtle mound on front left and back right of those tee sets. So when you looked up, you couldn't see it. And that is where Mackenzie had that whole theory of camouflage. Mackenzie design from when he was at All Woodley was camouflage. And it come from his army, I think it was the First World War, and the art, his time in the army.
It was like how you...
Colt again did the same at Rye. And I think all of that thing, I've always been a student of the architecture of that period. From when Colt did St George's Hill, and I've worked at Burr Hill and I've played golf when I was at Wentworth in all those clubs, Surrey, Heathland, Belt. But
it's a good grounding for Golden Age design.
It's fantastic for me because I grew up, when I went to Wentworth, it was the first time I'd been away from home, went and lived on the course, and we had a guy in charge of us called Jerry Coley, who, God rest his soul, he wasn't probably the most revered head greenkeeper, but he was obsessed with curing compaction and per annum management, annual meadow grass in the greens. At the same time, Jack McMillan was at Sunningdale, and he had, I think, 4 or 5 sons who were, went on to be course managers, all in the Surrey, the Surrey Heathland Belt area. Lawson Bingham was at Swinley Forest. Yeah. So all these guys, I can remember nights when all the Wentworth greenkeepers who were interested, not everyone was, went to sit with Jack and talked about greenkeeping.
Yeah.
And it was at a time
Was that like a new thing back then? Was it not none of that?
Well, yeah, we were way behind the curve, Paul. The States were so far. It was before you had Greenkeeper of the Year and a scholarship to go to the States, So the whole, it wasn't amateur hour, but a course manager at that time, this was my problem. I went to college, day release to college, and I found it was something that I loved. And I think part of it was I was earning money at it. So I was interested in it, and it struck a chord with me. So I excelled at it. It was just something that, I wasn't necessarily academic at school. I was great at sports, but, I was okay. I got the grades I had to, but it was a struggle. But when I went into greenkeeping, it was just second nature.
Yeah.
And at that time, by the time I was 23 years old, I was an assistant head greenkeeper. At 23, I had been at Royal Mid Surrey, Wimbledon Common first, Royal Mid Surrey, and then the Roehampton Club. I was the assistant head greenkeeper, and I had nowhere to go because no one would let me be a head greenkeeper at 25.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't happen. All the greenkeepers at that time were like Jack, with the exception of maybe his sons, but they had an association with their father. He was a tough mentor, and all of the boys were good at what they did.
But they honed their craft there. So like Jack at Sunningdale at the time was like he was key in Surrey and just like teaching good agronomy and good practice.
Surrey has a history of great Scottish greenkeepers. It's the home of good greenkeeping. No detriment to the guys now, but at that time, if you knew your salt, you were from Scotland. Because the management of fescue grasses as well had a lot to do with it.
Braid was the pro at Walton Heath, 50 years or something absurd, wasn't it? It was literally day one to about 48 or something. I mean,
it's just, and that's what happened. So basically, I was at Roehampton at 22 years old, and I met someone out for a drink in Ascot. I was out, clubbing as we were at that time in Bagshot. And I met this guy I was at college with, and I had the crack with him, and I knew him from Royal Mid Surrey, and we were stood in this club, and I couldn't believe I'd met him, and he said, "What are you doing over here?" And inevitably it was a young lady, and we had the crack, and he just said, "Look, there's a job going at Wentworth with a house." He said, "And you've got the qualifications." He's putting together 7 guys who are all capable of being a head greenkeeper. They're all 22, 23 years old, but they're not going to get a job.
And that's the golden era for
Wentworth,
and that was
it.
That was the match play championship.
That was it.
That was everything. I mean, that
2
was
tournaments a year. So
that was the top. That was the premier place, really, in British golf.
It was brilliant for me
day.
because I got a chance to leave home, which I'm sure my father and mother were delighted about. I think they probably packed before I even knew I got the job. But I found myself living on my own at 23 years old at Wentworth, and we had the White Mackay PGA Championship I'm pretty sure it was in May. Might have been, start of the season. So you're trying to get the best putting surfaces with Pomerania at the time in the world, and the old 2-tiered, third hole, which Tom Kite, I don't know if you remember it, he took a wedge. I think he took 6 attempts to get up.
Really? I don't remember that.
I mean, if you look that up, and then
you got him so slick, he just couldn't get his thing onto the top deck.
The tier was something like 11 foot high, and he just kept putting
natural. I
think in
tier.
the end, he used a wedge off the green, which was frowned upon at the time, but obviously totally legal. But they were brilliant times, and the mowers that we were cutting, we were achieving those heights. It was a work of art for the mechanics. It was unreal.
They had to get them so sharp because they were just old bits of kit.
I think we had one green that we used to cut with a floating head Toro, which was an American mower that had come over, and it was the only one we could use on the tier greens. And the others, you fought with your colleagues to get a Paladin mower because they were the best. If you were Paladin. If you were really unlucky, you got a Ransoms, and then
you're going down to keep a straight line. These things,
trying to keep a straight line with one of those was. But
are we ironing greens at this point? Is it?
No, not a chance. No. I think we used to verti cut and dry cut with a triple in the evening, and those were Ransom's Hahn, which are, some people in the greenkeeping world, if they hear this, will remember them. No power steering, all 3 units on the front, and you finished 18 holes cutting on a Saturday morning, you were like Arnie Schwarzenegger. I mean, you weren't fit for anything else. And I can remember playing semi-pro football for Virginia Water then. Even in the FA Cup, I can remember cutting greens in the morning on a Saturday.
You played FA Cup?
Caddying caddying at 10 o'clock, finishing at 1, getting down to the ground for 1:30, playing Met Police in the FA Cup. And then going out on the lash. So they were great times for me, and I was there I did 9 tournaments at Wentworth, and I met some brilliant lads that went on to Sunningdale to be head greenkeepers. I'm trying to think where he is now. North Downs, I think, and a few other lads. And then obviously I got to go back with Abbott's when I was working for Abbott's, and we did the Ernie Els changes. Yeah. So that was not so interesting because, you know, I don't think Ernie Els knew who Harry Cole was. Yeah. Or he maybe spelled it wrong, I don't know. But I didn't agree with everything that went on. But you get attached to what was the Burma Road, you know. But
then you get into this like world of construction, and I guess, I mean, we had a pretty early exposure to your abilities to build stuff when we turned up on the new site for the construction of the new course at Cabot Highlands. And for anyone that's been to Castle Stuart before, you'll see the brilliant sleepers that are just sort of popped up around the side with
marram everywhere,
marram grass poking out the top. And around the porter cabins, you'd decked it out with the sleepers all exactly the same as the clubhouse. And we're like, bloody hell, that's a bit impressive. And you're like, yeah, I just botched that up about half an hour ago. So you're a practically minded character, aren't you? So does the construction stuff come easily? Because I'm quite keen to kind of chat some of this stuff through, because just the scale of it all and the complexity of construction with golf, I think, is massively overlooked. Well, it's really easy for idiots like us to sit here on a podcast and go, yeah, I quite like sort of Gil Hans's work there, and you know, I suppose a bit different as Tom Doak's there, and you know, when you actually go on site, you get a very quick appreciation for just how much stuff is happening and how much nuance there is to this. Yeah,
but I think also you're possibly undermining your own personality slightly there, because I think what I see in both of you is a passion for golf, you know, and the right era, you know, from Walpolston to right through to when I worked at Walton Heath. These are the clubs that I miss because, you know, I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I can remember working with committee members on a Saturday morning at both those clubs, and they would turn up eccentrically dressed, tweed, but almost scruffy, where they'd been wearing a suit all week.
Sweaters with holes in.
But they didn't need to wear the latest G4 stuff and bright colours and they didn't. They just went out with a pencil bag and they played the game in its purest fashion. And that's always...
That's what you like.
That's always in me. And then... But the whole thing is, I can remember, you know, when I was probably 3 or 4, being on the beach in Norfolk, because my auntie had a guest house up there, so that's where we went from London for our holidays. And I can remember shaping dunes that were behind me in miniature style in the sand.
Really?
Sort of for my cars to go through, you know, all kids had little cars. And my mum used to, I've got pictures of me on the beach, 3 or 4 years old, punching holes, making a bridge, and not bunkers, but I was copying the dunes that were there. Yeah. So, and then, but it all comes, you know, like, I've got friends who you know as well. I won't mention him by name, but his passion was snooker, you know.
Okay.
But you know, I'm talking about Stuart. But then when Stuart worked with...
about Clyde, though.
They've both got a passion.
Well, Clyde again. But,
Stuart McComb, the GM at Cabot Highlands, that's 147, isn't he?
Yes. Well, I'm not so sure that's true, but I think he wants...
We don't let the truth get in the way of a good story on this podcast.
So yeah, I think that frightened Clyde a bit. I think. So I think the answer to that question is yes, he definitely did. But Stuart's passion is unrivaled, and I think I've got that passion, and I think that's why we've been friends a long time. And I think that's. But when he worked with Mark Parsons at King's Barnes, and then they went to Castle Stuart, they realised that I wouldn't say they made mistakes, but they wanted to do things better, and they used the technique of snooker in the construction of Castle Stuart.
Don't believe you.
Well, they did, because what they did is when you play snooker, you're thinking 2 shots ahead. And when you play Castle Stuart, if you can do that, you're not 3 or 4 shots off your round, because it's where you put the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah? It's what side of the fairway you are. You don't have to be long at Castle Stuart. If you put it in the right area, I mean, one of the prime examples is probably 14. If you put it down the left-hand side of 14, you've taken out that whole ridge side and that fall off on the right. You've got the length of the green to come in with. If you go right-hand side of the fairway, which is the easiest drive, you've got that very narrow green to hit, and then behind it. So Mark
Megadeth.
wanted you to, not necessarily the first time you played it, but if you're a pro in a tournament and you're playing there 4 days and you've had a practice round, you plot your way round.
Yeah.
That's snooker.
I think it's interesting going back to touch upon one of your early points where you talked about how bunkers should look like they've been there forever, and it was just part of the thing. I think what they did really well at Castle Stewart is the sort of the naturalisation of the bunkers, the way they've kind of fallen in, and they've got the half Marram sort of face to it, and for a new course, I think it's probably one of the finest examples of looking like it's been there forever. And it's interesting seeing the new place, because obviously when the first time we went down, it's like it's a big expanse of
mind-boggling how you can see golf holes in that.
I think a lot of credit obviously goes to Tom and Clyde in doing that, and they are conscious that they want to put their own twist on their golf course, and they're building a second Castle Stewart wouldn't be a benefit to anybody. It would just be you've got to be different. But what they have done is they've been respectful and understood what went before, and there's a few things that we were unsure of. Like for me personally, it was the crossover of 1 and 18 to start with. But once I listened to Stuart and Clyde and Tom himself about why they'd done it, it made total sense to me. So. And I don't think they're frightened to be a little bit quirky, which I think was what Mark was as well. And I just think it's a fantastic piece of real estate. It's attached to a very successful resort that's going to expand massively, and I think it's a great security for the existing golf course after obviously Mark's sad passing, but I think it's a great injection for Scottish golf as well.
And the Highlands will benefit because it's, we'll come back to shape and the construction in a minute, but the Highlands as a destination, it's about trying to keep people there a bit longer. I think that's beneficial up there.
Yeah,
I don't think you're struggling as much in East Lothian or Ayr because it's all a bit more compact. But
yeah, I think what they were finding were a lot of the Americans that were visiting were doing the West Coast, and they were coming around to Doak, and they were heading straight to Royal Aberdeen before Trump was built. And then I think Mark's idea was that if they had somewhere by road on the way down, and you've got Nairn, and there's there's Lossiemouth, there's a lot of Cruden Bay, there's all these clubs in that area before they get down to St Andrews, which obviously again is another cluster of many good golf courses.
You talked earlier on about, you said, obviously we've called you a shaper, and you said you were somewhere doing some finishing. For the layman amongst us, what's the difference? So
basically, how I got into this whole situation was I got contacted by my ex-course manager at Wentworth, who'd been at Doak and Hinkley Common. And he'd gone to work for John Jacobs, and they built the Buckinghamshire. So he was the main man for Kojima, I think, with the Japanese owners of the Buckinghamshire at the time. And Kevin Munt was in a situation where Southern Golf, who were building the Buckinghamshire, they were building Hanbury Manor, and then they were going to go on to build Wisley, all in that year. So they were stretched. But what contractors did in those days was when you move somewhere, if you've got a big team, you've got to pay for a lot of housing. You've got to pay for a lot of meals. So they took managers. So they took a manager of muck shift, like, earth movement, and he took a manager of shaping, which was generally the shaper himself, 2 or 3 shapers. But the finishing team were guys off the dole who could,
really
put them on a rake. But the thing is,
because the finishing is just the rake, right? So the finishing is.
But this is weird, because I've heard like a bad finisher can ruin a good.
Absolutely. So
work.
that's your point, and that was Kevin and I's niche market, and this is where it all started. So I did the 1989 Panasonic European Open, run by Andrew Murray at not the tennis player.
Not saying that. He'd have been about. I don't know if he was born then.
So that was all right, son. Calm down. Your dad's talking.
This is Mik's podcast. Let me know.
So basically, he approached me. Said, "Look, I've got this idea. of taking ex-greenkeepers or greenkeepers on holidays to take 2 weeks out, course managers come and work for us, and we'll pay them £8 an hour, which was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, but we were getting more than double that. So we made this company up. I left, had in my notice, which was tough because Waterneath is the one golf course I would say I've missed.
Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Just as a quick aside,
it was a family. It was Wing Commander Bill McRae and then Sandy Heron were the secretaries. It was old school. It was the only club with had a reigning monarch as captain, and the history. Ken McPherson was the pro there who still made persimmon.
Yeah. We met Ken this year at the ARG Women's. Nice guy.
Really nice guy.
They got the Churchill room and all that stuff.
He was fantastic, and so when I went there as deputy course manager to Clive, who'd been there from when he was a boy, Clive Osgood, it was stepping into a sleeping giant on public land. And the first hole's always been a problem for the old course, getting that over the other side. But just the history and the beauty of it, And then obviously when we had the European Open, it's a composite course of the old and the new. It was fantastic, brilliant tournament, and I didn't really want to leave, but my whole point was at that age, I was then 20, I think I was 27, 28 then. Clive had been there when he was a boy. He was a course manager, and he knew the golf course, and he knew it really well. So he would go out and look at the greens and know whether they needed water or fertiliser, because he'd been there every day since he left school. For me, I'd been to college. I was used to taking moisture readings. I would be putting on fertiliser using a hopper. They would use it by hand with like a bird bath thing. So not a conflict, but I didn't think I could get up the ladder there. Yeah. I needed to do a change. So my decision was I either go and do irrigation or I do construction. And I've ended up doing both, which I think you've got to do. I think if you're going to be telling people what to do in a management role, which I'm doing now at Castle, you need to know what you're asking them to do. You need to have a great knowledge of it. You can't just tell someone to do something you don't know how to do, because then you've got to lead by example, I think. So we started Blade, which was a company, and the idea was it was the blade of the digger or the dozer, the blade of the grass, and then the blade of the club. So that was the 3 stages. And our basic work was to do the finishing, which was people who could get on a rake, to your point at the time. That's the hardest thing to use, because if you get ripples or you don't get a finish, then they got skilled on sand pros, which I think you've seen. I don't know if you've seen the boys, which is they call them the bike in the States. So they got dimpled tyres and little rakes on the back. And then we had things like a York rake, tractors with stone barriers on. And we would end up because I did that for 2 years, and then I got asked by Southern Golf to go and be a contracts manager. Stuart got asked, and the lads that we had working for us, we had 14 lads, and we said, look, they wanted all our lads basically, so they gave us a fee to put our company on company shelf and go work for them.
So before you did that, they were just getting people off the dole for finishing.
Exactly. And the contract.
What were they asking me to do? Just run a rake over or something?
Yeah, so the contract.
So there must be a massive reason for why some of these courses built in that era just lack a bit of je ne sais quoi. Yeah. Well, it must be though, right?
See the French fella.
I did French.
Is that the one who took a bit of socks off at Carnoustie? I know. But no, I totally. That is totally the situation. Is that that's the whole point we were making earlier. Is that we were dealing with Jack Nicklaus Jr., Golden Bear, and the site manager was an American guy called Jeff Lawrence. They'd come from the States, and it was what the hell was going on here, and that's what Kevin saw. So I literally had friends from Fox Hills, Leyland Golf Club. They came on their holidays. They did 2 weeks. They got paid handsomely, and it got us off the ground the first year. Then we had legitimate staff. Stuart came from Elwood College. And then we went to Germany the second, we did Wisley and Hanbury Manor, and we started at the Oxfordshire, and then I went to Berlin. The wall had come down, and we went out there in 1990.
Bloody hell, 89.
Yeah,
the wall had come down.
We went in 90 but the wall was still up, you had to drive.
Do you know when the wall came down?
1989.
9th of November, 89.
Right, yeah.
My birthday. Only reason I know. Well, I was 85, but yeah, 9th of November, 89. Do you think that Berlin trip was like the steepest learning curve? I don't know if that's the right word, but like a eureka moment for you in terms of...
Always loved travelling. Even now, I like to get in the truck or on the plane and go somewhere I've never been, and I'm doing that early next year. I can't really say too much, but it just come from nowhere. It's word of mouth. Someone rings you up, would you be interested in doing this? How long is it for? 6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Is the travel hard? Did you find that
No,
difficult?
I love it.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going right out of my comfort zone with this latest one. So
it's not the new TGL site that's just come down.
You're not fixing their roof for you.
No, that's not me. But it's just for me. I don't have let's get to the nitty gritty relationships. Right, if you're living out of a bag, so I come home with my bag on a Friday. I take out the dirty washing, but most of the other stuff stays in there. So things like waterproofs and stuff like that, I'll probably leave it where I'm working, and then on the last day I've got double the amount of stuff to come back with. But if you're in a relationship, you have to be with someone who understands what you do. And I was in a long relationship, and it worked, but
it's hard, isn't it?
I get that buzz, and I think there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off. If you like what you do, and that's what floats your boat, then I'll never tire. I don't see myself retiring. I just see myself slowing down a bit. So I'm in a position now where I'm able to cherry pick the jobs I want to do, and then I spend probably 4 months of the year at home in Yorkshire, which I really enjoy. I don't play football anymore, so walking's quite a big thing. And it just, and I mean, I'm out walking and I'm looking at shapes in the heather. It's just like,
can't get away from it.
And it's and that's the thing. And it's a really weird way that we've got to it. But basically, what I've perfected is what Stuart started when they did Castle Stuart, which is chunking, and a lot of people do it
chunking.
Now. So basically, you have an adapter on the bucket that allows you to cut chunks of turf, large chunks. So you're turfing with the digger. That's what you're doing. But you have to have a designated area of the bunker. It can't be an area between a greenside bunker and the green. You can't put heather there. You can sometimes, but
chunk is
it's the heather and the mat grass,
that,
sometimes gorse and things like that. So where the one club I won over is a great guy. Chris Roberts is the course manager. He does a bit of consultancy work as well, and he's at Sutton Coldfield Golf Club. Sleeping Giant.
They're doing a lot of work there.
They are, yeah. So I started the work there, and there's a Pat Quinn is the pro, passionate about bunkers.
Is that on common land?
Yes,
oh, yeah,
Sutton Park. Yeah,
Sutton Park,
Royal Park.
Yeah, it used to be owned by Henry VIII. It was.
That's right. There's a shooting lodge there. Yeah,
and we're sat in Market Bosworth, which is, and there's painting of Henry VII on the way in.
Are you sure he's not my dad? Oh, I remember my dad being that boring.
Anyway, minor segue into Leicestershire.
So Sutton.
Yeah, so basically, I went with Chris and I said to him, "What are you going to do? What's the style of bunker?" And he didn't really know. And I said, "Look, would you consider chunking? What are you allowed to do in the Royal Park? Are we allowed to cut heather?" And he said, "Well," he didn't really know. And I said, "Look, we're on a greenside bunker, but at the fourth, I think it was the fourth we did, and the fifth tees were next to it, and the carry was just heather that had been choked with grass for the last 10, 15 years, and the heather was hardly there. So I said, if you turf cut that, or I cut it with the bucket, and I leave that much black layer underneath, in 2 years' time, that'll be pure heather. And he knew his stuff, and we did it. So we regenerated. We sold it to the Royal Park that we would rope this area off. We would put brashings of heather in there as well, so because they flail and catch the seed. And we treated that as heather, and we put the cut stuff on the bunker, which aged the bunker. And I'll never forget it, and Chris will bear me out. If you meet Chris, he'd be a good lad to chat to on a podcast as well. He's got so very passionate. A lot of the courses that you've been to, he consults at, like the old school ones. And we started on the Monday, and on a Friday afternoon we were just buttoning up. We put 3 new bunkers in and chunked them and put heather on the back, and I reshaped them, and they were finished. They were sanded, and 2 members who only play weekends but had got a chance to play Friday afternoon. These 2 old boys were walking down massive Mackenzie, course, and they walked down and they said to Chris, "Oh, what's going on here?" So Chris said, "Oh, well, we've done it. Well, why is that digger here?" And he said, "Well, we've been working here." "Well, what have you done?" And he said, "Well, what do you think we've done?" "Well, I can't see anything different." So I said, "Well, have a look at the bunkers." I can't put my finger on it. He said, "Well, there's 3 new bunkers." "No, they're not. They've always been there." And that was the best compliment I'd ever had.
That's the testimonial right there.
And when they listened and they wanted to know, which was really nice, they weren't just interested in playing their round. They were gobsmacked, and that was the thing. We made them fit into the environment that was already there. We used the indigenous plant, the heather, with the grass in it. And then when I went back for 2 years, and the carry has never been stronger. It's pure heather. Really? So we regenerated 2 areas. And
it's very hard to
your whole point.
Heather.
But we missed that. Your whole point earlier about the compound work with the sleepers.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you ever saw it, but it was heartbreaking for the lads at Castle Stuart because they built a par 3. I don't know whether you know, a 9-hole par 3.
Oh,
Did you ever see it?
I did. We walked it.
And I played. I was lucky enough to play 2 rounds there, and I think some of the lads that even built it didn't get a chance to play it.
It was designed so you could play with the whole thing. Probably 80 yards was the longest. Do the whole thing with the putter.
You could do it with the putter. We did a 3-club challenge around there. A putter, a wedge, and you didn't need anything else. I mean, it was 2-club challenge. No bag, but we took a trolley because we had gin and tonics in it, and that's how Stuart wanted it. Yeah. Summer's evening, played it. So glad I did. Mark said to the team at the time, I believe this is right, that it was the finest shaping they'd ever done, and he was talking about Kings Barnes and Castle Stuart.
Yeah, that was the best.
And I mean, when I was talking to Hutch about it, he told me how long they took to get a little bump in front of the green to shed the ball to the left. So it made the pin, it was really
and it had all the compress and release stuff. And
exactly. It's taking you. So the whole point was that in there were sleepers, in there was marram grass, and in there was chunk. So the best thing about it, and we're chalk and cheese in characters, but Brian, who you've met, who's the environmentalist, environmental clerk of works, he said to me the biggest asset for Castle Stuart was that they hardly brought anything in. All the sand capping of the fairways was there. The only thing they brought in was the sleepers. So I made a conscious effort that when we were dismantling the 9-hole, let's take those sleepers and let's make these cabins look less clinical and more, less landscape. But we had the time. We were waiting to fire up, so I had a month, sort of 3 weeks to do that, and we just got the cabins.
You did say you want to create the best working environment for people working on building a course, because it's like Clive Woodward type principles, whatever, or all black.
But do you remember what was there? You're gonna have to. I've only been there to that section once, Mick, so you're gonna have to fill me in. But when you got there was a couple of cabins that had sleepers for steps, and there was a marram coming out the side, and there was a bench made out of sleepers.
Wasn't there something
in the shed?
Barbecue pit.
That was it. A barbecue out of.
Yeah. You created a smoking little tapas spot as well.
We had a smoking area, but we made a barbecue out of a digger bucket.
Out of a digger bucket.
A huge digger bucket, because when you're cooking for 20 guys.
Yeah.
sadly we only had one barbecue with Scottish weather.
Yeah, that's a good summer.
I think our attitude when the management team got together was that, and it was a conscious effort by Stuart, that we needed to continue the feel that you get in the clubhouse. Now, a lot of the guys that are driving diggers are yet to go in the clubhouse, and I'm sure they will, at some point, and I took a few of them on an early morning drive, like the one we did with you guys, to show them the finished article, because some of these guys never been on a golf course before. But we've
really,
some of the earth movers, but we've trained them. We've seen potential in them, and then we've just steered them gently. And Clyde's done a lot of that as well. Clyde and Chris Aspel have worked with guys that have done roads, and instead of doing flat areas, you can do the tees later, but right now we need a bit of shape, and they've steered those. And Hutch has done the same, and Hex, and the boys of what we've got a team of really good characters, nice guys, never late, always there, reliable. And what we wanted to give them was, I know for a fact, so for instance, Jobs, who do all the earth movement, these guys work in some of the, coldest areas and quarries and stuff like that. And they were coming here, they were getting tea, coffee, milk, sausage rolls occasionally, but they were getting a beautiful canteen. Clean toilets, that makes
a difference. Take a pride.
And we
in your
just
work.
thought, if we, if you're feeling a little bit tired after you've done 80 hours a week, and you wake up in the morning, you think, I might have today off. If you're going to Castle Stewart, you think, well, actually, I don't want the day off, so I quite enjoy it when I go to work.
There's a couple of things a couple more like sort of themes I'd like to touch on. When I talk about shaping and sort of golden age architecture shaping, and how you try and restore some of that stuff in a little bit. What's, first of all, an obvious question, what's it like working with Tom Doak and Clyde and having all those guys on board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a massive selling point. If you're anyone in golf, you know who these guys are. I'd never met Clyde before, but I'd heard about him. He does similar sort of thing to myself in the winters. He's gone off to do his own stuff. They're schooled in a very similar way, and their knowledge of old style courses is very similar, and I think that's what I see in you guys as well. And I think
that's the best time will ever be compared to Tom Doak and Clyde.
No, but I think so. I think
I'm a marginally better ball striker. That'd be about the only difference you can probably see, Mick.
I think the thing is that era that you guys have tied into. From everything, with the clothing, with the branding, with the posts you make and the clubs you go to, you've got that similar thing to what I like and what Stuart likes and what Mark liked. And there is, to me, golf is a traditional sport, right? I know we're opening it up to the massives. I know denim is a thing that's now being considered, and and it's about getting bodies through. But the reason that's necessary is because it's a boom industry, right? It was a boom industry in the 80s, then it started again in the 90s, then in lockdown it got bigger again, But now people are starting to realise after lockdown that their leisure time is more important to them now, and they're not going to pug all their money away for their kids. They're going to join the golf club. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. So now we've got a situation where I think we had a lot too many golf courses. And now I think, for me, the reason it's got really busy is that a lot of the golf courses now after COVID, because I thought in COVID, the last thing that's going to happen here is that after they've not been allowed to play for 4 months, I'm going to get work digging a golf course up. Because they'll say to me, why didn't you do it in COVID? But I couldn't do it in COVID because there was nowhere to stay. All the hotels were shut. So, but all the golf clubs decided that they would invest and make their golf club better than 2 down the road.
Well, they were flush with cash, weren't they?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the questions, I suppose. I mean, looking at the construction stuff, you're working on a project that's, Cabot, Tom Doak, Yeah, it's as close to an unlimited budget, really, in that sort of
So
field.
look,
do you build differently if you're building for like I don't know if you've done, for example, a municipal, or someone said, do you know, we've got this, but we really, really haven't got loads to put at it. What are the areas that you make sacrifices on, or how do you work with those sort of economies?
I think the thing is that I knew about this project for quite a while, but obviously couldn't say anything, and you know, through connections, I was always sort of in mind to be involved, and it's a total pleasure. It's about listening a lot of the time. You've got your own thought process on it, but we didn't even know what type of golf course we were going to get. None of us did. We didn't know what was in Tom's head. We didn't know what the ethos of it was. We didn't know the amount of shaping that was going on. What we've got is a situation where the architect visits. He's so busy, Tom. He's all over the world, Australia, you know, all different places. And when he gets to come, him and Clyde can make a decision for the next 3 or 4 months, and that's when it all starts to take shape. Clyde's there every day, sees ideas. He's got to think. He's obviously talking to Tom all the time, but when they're here, it really picks up. And so after Tom's visit, we suddenly saw what we were going to get. Clyde started with Chris and Rory and Vittorio this year, 4 shapers, and
met Vittoria. He came to our drinks party at
that's
Walker
right.
Cup.
Yeah, I didn't get an invite for that. Was that?
You're coming to our Christmas party. Dealing with
Andrews.
Mick for our Christmas party was an absolute farce. He kept texting me, telling me it's not working. It seems to be working for every other bugger.
I think his comment was, it's like trying to teach your granddad to play PlayStation,
or your dad,
which I didn't really like. I'd gone from father to granddad, you know, in a blink of an eye. But I think. We found out that we thought, and we didn't mean it in a detrimental way, we had a feeling when we saw the drawings that it was going to be a safe golf course, because there wasn't plans to do much earth movement. It was all in grade, and it's design in the field. So there's no...
What does that mean? Sorry, what does that mean?
If you say to me, Mick, how many 1,000 cubic metres of material we're going to move with the earth movers this month, I could generally tell you if I had a cut and fill plan and that came from the architect with a final drawing. We didn't have that. So Clyde and Tom look at the whole. It evolves that with Ben at Cabot, and he's got a very good knowledge of golf. And when you look at the golf courses that are already in the Cabot group, they're a great fit for Castle Stewart, in my opinion. They're very much built around the same ethos, the same feel. And it was amazing that because of the engineering that's had to go on, it's an engineering feat. We are removing massive amounts of topsoil to unveil gravel and then sand. We're shaping in the gravel. We're hiding the topsoil in mounds. We don't want it. We're trying to get rid of topsoil, and we're then... So when we have these massive piles of stored topsoil, I think Tom, and I wasn't actually there, but, you know, to quote him without being there, I don't want to be wrong, but he hadn't seen that much earth movement going on a project. And I think it inspired him in some ways. I think he became a lot more braver with the shapes, and it's worked really well. So, and I had a discussion with Clyde early on. You know, Clyde's a slow burner, you know, but when you sit down and chat to him at length, you can see, and I said to him, do you see that the shaping as it goes inland towards the railway will become a lot more, you know, gentle to blend in as it gets away from the shoreline? And he said, absolutely, and it has done, you know, and I think it's encouraging now that we know exactly what holes we're building, because some of that was up in the air. I can't really go into that, but now we know what we're building. Next year's a massive year for us. And
clarity. It's a partnership that's got to blossom between you as the construction guy and then Clyde/Tom as the architect.
Yeah.
When you talked about moving earth, when we did the drive, I'm thinking about, you were talking about how you're moving the topsoil away, expose the sand and the gravel, mine that, then put the topsoil, bury that places where you don't want it, move the sand to another part. You've got to lay irrigation the fairways and the greens. You've then got to think about where you get the water for the site across what is, I'm guessing, 300-ish acres or something like that.
It's near 7, acres, yeah.
As a scale of engineering across that site with natural earth and with diggers and building, that's like mind-blowing.
Well,
so can you give us a sense of like how important it is to get the project management, which you're responsible for, right? The project management of how you move that, the sequencing and stuff, and what that means in real terms for cost.
I think so. Stuart's heavily involved. Stuart is the project manager. I'm his assistant site manager. So and Hutch is involved as a course manager, and obviously he's coming over. So between us, and then we have Malky, who's in charge of the earth moving company. We make a plan, and that has to change, and it will change on what Clye wants to do. So because there's no plans of where we're mining the sand, we have to mine the sand where Clye doesn't want to shape.
Okay.
Because we know that is a long process.
But you've got loads of sand down.
Yeah, so we have to take the topsoil. Well, we have to be careful, but so we have different grades of sand.
Oh, really?
So if we have sand it's got too many fines in it, and we think it's probably going to clog up a bit, we use that on the dunes because the water will run off the dunes. It doesn't have to necessarily get in. But if we've got really good draining sand with less fines in it, that's our fairway sand.
You have all different types of sand.
And then we have a root zone quarry now, which is purely for greens and tees.
Okay.
So we did tests before we started. We did tests to find out and sent all these sand samples away. So we dug holes everywhere. Looked like a cheese factory. There were holes everywhere. And we sent them all away for samples, and then we worked out our areas. But then the holes, not necessarily that the routing of the golf course changes, but certainly the infrastructure of the mounding around it and what Clyde did and didn't want to see. And obviously we've got Norboard, which is the MDF factory. And the big thing for Ben was that he didn't want the clients to be able to see that. So if you're paying the green fee rates that Castle Stewart are at the moment, which is probably going to increase, I would guess, with the lodges and 2 courses to play, there are things that you don't want your customer to see. It might be a house rooftop, it might be an industrial chimney. So the whole shaping, the depth of the fairway, dropping people down, which means you don't have to build the bouncer high, and then certain aspects, and then raising them again in the fairway. So that's why you'll find a lot of the fairways on 15, for instance, go down, come back up, and then the mounding is, that's all things that Clyde's taken into his perspective of what he's doing. But the other thing is what Sam was talking about is, yes, we're in pure sand and then gravel, but we're buried topsoil. So the topsoil is never buried on the fairway. It's buried in the non-playing areas. But the trouble is we found is that when we've sand capped the topsoil, the water has gone down through the sand, hit the topsoil and pushed the topsoil out, and it's leached out. The fines get onto the fairway, it caps off, and we've got puddles. So then you've got a situation where you need to get seeded and finished and hydroseeded, which is when you put the mulch on and it goes hard and you protect it. So it's a massive...
Complicated.
It is a massive project.
And you're dealing with a lot of money, aren't you? Because it hasn't got to be about Cabot Highlands, because that's relevant now, and etc. And you don't want to disclose costs and stuff. But give us some sense of quantum here of like whether it's the Oxfordshire or the Wisley or Berlin or what you're planning to build next year. What are you burning through a day when you're building these things? It must be so expensive.
It depends on how much plant you've got and the kit. So if you've got 30, 40 pieces of kit on site and 30 or 40 operatives, they've got to be working, and they've got to be working in an economical manner. So when you dig the topsoil and you want to get rid of it, put it where you haven't got to move it again. So the first hole you dig, you're storing that topsoil somewhere. Yeah, the first one you dig. So that needs to go where you're never going to move it again, and where it can form the spine of mounds. That's the first quarry we did. We took the stuff out. Then we find the gravel, and the gravel goes into 5 fairway because we want to bring 5 fairway up by a metre and a half. Clyde wants to bring it up to keep the water away from it. So we run all that for a week with one gravel, with 5 dump trucks, one digger digging it, one dozer receiving it, and another digger shaping it.
It's like 100 grand.
Right. So those guys are moving that stuff, and they need to move it in an economical manner. So, it happens, and it's never happened at Castle Stewart because we've got good dumper drivers. But I can remember sites when dumper drivers were bored and chasing each other. So then I've got 3 dump trucks parked up waiting to be loaded by a guy who's working like a madman for half an hour. And then I've got 3 dump trucks racing down to a guy on a dozer who's been sat there twiddling his thumbs for half an hour. And I'm
so they've all got to be working in the same
it's like
cadence.
It's like a bike chain.
Yeah.
So you got your small sprocket and your big sprocket. You got a dump truck at each end and one in the middle. If I see you catch each other, you're out of a job.
Baseball bats are out.
You shouldn't even be talking. They want to catch up, stand on the footplate, and have the crack for half an hour. But they don't realise that when they're racing down to the guy who's been parked up for half an hour waiting for material, the guy who's digging it has then got an half an hour wait for him to come back.
Yeah.
So it's about education, and that where you're making money on any project is in your bulk earthworks. It's not in your shaping.
Really?
So if you've got a really good bulk earthworker, moving your stuff where you want it and getting it close to what so basically you've got a plan of what the hole looks like. You tell the earthworks guys to get it within 100 or 200 mil of the finished article, then the shapers come in and finish it.
But when you're talking about building in the field, that is just a luxurious way of doing it that gives the architect the right to sort of walk through it. I don't quite like that. Let's do this. If you're building off plan for a new municipal build golf course, you'd want to know as close as possible where you could move that earth to so that you could get it as close as possible.
Absolutely.
And then you minimise the construction costs for the client. Because that's really important.
When you're working for a municipal, unless it's St Andrews, it's going to be a council.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why you've got a situation like that. But the truth of the matter is, the last people that are going to look at the budget will be the golf course architect.
Because they want to do more. Can you still do really good stuff?
You almost end up with not a better product, but like a product which is closer aligned to what the architect wanted and not being restrained by what happened 4 stages ago. You know?
I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to tell you this, and I don't think this is probably something you want on the podcast, but
we'll give it a go.
But the nuts and bolts of it is that Ben is a big noise in a resort golf in the world at the moment. This is a high profile investment. This is a high profile project. This is a high profile resort. Okay, and it's gone under the radar a lot at the moment, but I think it's going to be massive. Tom Doak is arguably the best golf course architect in the world at the moment, and what he brings is credibility, a name, and a chance to have a shot at the top 100 golf courses in the world, and that's where they want to be. So, what he wants is, he's been employed as the golf course architect for a reason, to give us an instant stature and an instant jump in that market. So, what he says goes, but he's not arrogant enough to think that when he builds it, I mean, he's quite open. He'll talk about stuff, and and Ben's quite strong on what he wants as well. And there's been on tee placement, and even the 15th green site has changed. The client had a better idea where he wanted it, or he explained it to Tom, and he it's his property. He tells Tom what he wants. Tom tells him what ethically works, from a construction point of view, and it's a process that morphs. The other massive thing, which is we haven't talked about yet, is the fact that we are on the site of a castle from 1746, I think, or 48. It is archaeology.
Yeah.
It's just
massive. You're pulling up stuff there that's like regularly pulling up old china plates.
Well, I wouldn't say china.
Cups and stuff,
the archaeologists. we're stuck in the middle. We're trying to build a golf course.
You don't want to find the Holy Grail, though, do you?
But we've been close. I've had a 5,000-year-old piece of pottery put in my hand, and I'm the only third person to have touched it in 5,000 years.
No way.
And despite what you think, I wasn't there when it was made. But the archaeologist said to me, Mick, you're sort of interested in that. I said, yeah, but I'm interested in building a golf course. Stop finding stuff.
Yeah.
Which he laughed at, and he took it out of a bubble wrap. He said, whatever you do, don't drop this.
What happens to that stuff?
Yeah, I think he'll go to museums and stuff like that. But literally, it was.
But it won't stop progress.
It has done. We found so on the 7th fairway we found a wood henge. Well, they found a wood henge, which is about 5,000 years old. They've never found one of those in the Highlands that far up. It was a massive find. It's the find of his career, the head archaeologist. Yeah. So we've had the council out and everything else, and it's a wooden version of Stonehenge. So
it's crazy, isn't it? We're in Leicester, and that is where they found. Was it Richard V, Richard VI, whatever? In the car, in the car park, the woman. It's the most ridiculous story, isn't it? The woman who just got totally obsessed with the notion that she could dig up Richard VI body or whatever, or Richard III or
was
whatever.
It in the car park?
It was in the car park. Yeah. She was like, anyway, look, let's not digress too much. It's the most ridiculous story. Whilst we are going to go back in time with my next question, we're not going to go back that far. I think this is you talked earlier, and probably a good part to sort of close the pod on would be about the shapes and the sort of work of whether it's Colt, Fowler. I had a great quote the other week from a guy called Mike Howard, who works for Mackenzie and Ebert, and he said Tom Simpson always said you should never be able to see the end of a slope. It was all sort of very natural and stuff. When they were making golf courses back then, they obviously had less ability to move earth. And now you're moving it in such large-scale changes. I suppose the construction process has changed undeniably. Is it always for the better?
Well, I think it depends how far you want to go back. So, obviously, we started on links land, didn't we? It was the land between the sea and the arable areas, and that had its own shape already. So, but I think Headingley, places like that, was some horrendous shaping that went on,
Right.
It was just horse and cart, and you looked at it, and it was very, very basic. But I think that the art now is that I go to golf clubs now, and they've budgeted on the amount of turf they're going to buy in, yeah? And I say to them, well, I'd like to strip out another 6-7 metres that way, to the base of that tree.
He says they build it too small now when they do it now.
You've got to tie it in.
And it drops off.
It has to be tied in. So the quote is very true, and it's not necessarily important to move a massive amount of soil. If you're going to fit something in, fit it in subtly to what's there. And that's what wins me work, is that my work needs to be... it needs to fit into its habitat and its environment, which is massively what Colt and Mackenzie were all about. The reason Augustus are different is that it was built on a nursery, and it was never meant to be like Alwoodley or Moortown or anywhere else like that. So that was where Mackenzie, in my opinion, stepped outside of what he was used to. And then he went to Royal Melbourne and did something, else like
on a
Colt.
flat piece of land, yeah.
Yeah, and they did stuff which fitted to where they were. They didn't try and take Alwoodley or Rye or anywhere else like that. Mackenzie certainly didn't take any of his courses to Augusta. He looked at what he had, and he did a golf course which is not... I appreciate what it is, but it's not my cup of tea. No. I understand it's a great golf course. I understand it's how they manage that place is off the charts.
But if you built Augusta now, you could move sufficient earth around to create your own vision of what should sit there.
But I think that's what we're doing now. I think what we're doing at Castle Stewart, and when you look at Cabot Highlands, there have been architects that have sat in the clubhouse and refused to believe that those dunes aren't natural. And they're not. It was a flat arable field. The amount of earth movement that went on there is absolutely staggering. But the end result is it looks like it's always been there. And it's so much so that people will sit in the clubhouse qualified in that area and don't believe it. And you have to show them pictures of the original site. So So you can be massively aggressive in what you're doing, but back to your point, without wishing to be detrimental to any golf courses that I've worked on, but Wisley was a floodplain between Perford Canal and the RHS Gardens River, and it was an engineering thing. Whatever material they took out of the lakes was the material they used to raise tees and greens.
And then
so therefore you're keeping the same amount of water capable of going across that floodplain. So that's why there's so many lakes at Wisley, because they needed to excavate to store water to build up a footprint where they couldn't store water. So it's the original floodplain. All those lakes are joined so the water travels through the site from the canal right across to the river. But to me, if you put me down on a hole in Wisley, I wouldn't know what hole I was on. They all look the same. And so does Hanbury Manor, and so does the Oxfordshire. But that was a period of time when they were doing that style.
And it was engineering, because so much of it was you're building on sites that weren't necessarily God-given great for golf.
And you have constraints.
Wet ground, so it's all an engineering project about how the hell are we going to irrigate this?
Well, I've read
the water away, and
I've read the original document. Well, a copy of the original documents for Colt, and they acquired the land at Rye. And there's no environmental officer. There's no planning officer telling them what they can and can't do, what heights the dunes can be that they're building.
There's no sort of triple SI going on.
There was none of it. No. It was well before that. But is Rye built to the detriment of the habitat? No, it's an asset, isn't it?
Type of sustainable.
Yeah, it's sort of Macrahanish Dunes is a new golf course on a triple SI land, but they literally rolled the dunes and trimmed them, and then overseeded them. They didn't do a lot of earth movement. Yeah. That's why the walks between the greens and the tees are so long. Is that McClay Kidd saw that his next hole wanted to be there, so you might have a 100-yard walk to the next tee
because you're rewarded
with dunes that were there. Yeah.
Just as a parting gift,
you're getting around it
because I'll get around it. That will be a parting gift. I'll do that in a moment. When you work on a Colt or Mackenzie or Fowler or whoever, Simpson, one of the sort of the golden age courses, and you are working with, basically, you're working with a masterpiece, and you're asked to do bunkers or something like that. Is there like a little nervousness or fear?
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Yeah, it's a very good point. So I got contacted 3 years ago by a guy called Steve Mucklow, who was at the Belfry, and he's been at Bodie's Air Golf Course in Cannock Chase for 25 years. Always wanted to do some changes.
Fowler course, isn't it?
Yes, and a very aggressive Fowler course. Very, very brave Fowler course. Lots of vertical banks and drops off backs of greens. But Steve had been there a long time, passionate, absolutely passionate. And this is a guy who was a client and is now a personal friend of mine. So we work very closely. He came up to Cabot and he was with me for a long weekend. Just came up and wanted to have a look around. We get on really well. He had ideas. The architect had been in and done the changes, and the club had agreed with that, and they owned the document. And then, so Ken Moody had done this report. And then it sort of slept. They did the club. I wouldn't say they didn't have the money, but they weren't ready to commit. And then they got in contact on the back of my work at Sutton Coldfield. They'd been to see it, liked the chunking, went and explained to Steve where we would take heather from, and mat grass, and bilberry is a big thing now, which is, I don't know if you know what bilberry is.
Yeah, bilberry, have bilberry pie, can't you?
Yeah. So that's blueberry pie, isn't it?
That's the Loughborough University party over in there.
Oh, nice.
That's where we're going in a minute. But
decibel levels just increased
just a precursor
massively
for next week. But basically, you're absolutely right, Tom. I was very nervous when I went there, because I don't know whether you've ever played Bodie's there, but you should.
Desperate to go and play it. I've never been.
Well, I can sort that. It's absolutely amazing. not necessarily long, but strategically, it's an architectural masterpiece. And so when I did the first bunker I had to build was on the first hole, and there was no bunker there. And
fairway or greenside?
Fairway. And he was stood watching me, and I said, Steve, the best thing you can do is trust me and just go away for 2 hours. And
that's what I say to Sam when I'm editing films, actually. Just go away now, Sam.
Best part is you're likening yourself to a master at work.
That is true.
But I think that was tough for Steve.
Yeah.
But I think it was also tough for me. But I had an idea of what I wanted to do. And he went away for 3 hours and came back and just laughed and smiled and said, I won't tell you what he said, but he basically said, how the hell have you done that? What have you done? And I'd peeled the grass back 17 metres into the woods, peeled it back with a bucket and built a ridge, flipped it back, and then taken some of the chunk from, because it was just virgin, ground, semi-rough, and put that in the top, because when I peeled it back, I put so much material in there, I was about 4 metres short of turf in the middle. So I cut bilberry from the back and put the bilberry in, and he didn't even know that I'd built that ledge. And from that moment, that was 3 years ago, he just said, just do what you want.
Yeah.
And all we've done is we worked with the committee there and asked them. We've done a lot of grassy hollows off of greens, so bailout areas, which is a big thing. We've extended the Fowler vertical mound, and then in the 18th, we changed the whole 18th last year. We took all the trees down round the back of the car park, which were conifers. There was no place for them on Heathland course. They built a 6 metre high patio and gave me 4 metres to tie it into the 18th. So it was an engineering feat, but we put in a really steep mound, which Fowler had given us that style.
Works with what's on the course already.
And we were lucky, because if we didn't have those steep fall-offs, we wouldn't have been able to make it fit. We would have had to move the 18th green. But we did that, and it was a blind shot, cross bunkers. We did away with the cross bank, where there's a bank of heather, so that the long hitters could get through the middle. And it's just turned out brilliant. But that is walking. So what a shaper does is he turns up, you're paying for a shaper, it's not going to be cheap. He's on an hourly rate. He turns up. If he's a good shaper, the machine will be ticking over and he'll disappear for 2 hours, because he's walking the course. He's walking the holes he hasn't seen yet. He's looking at little dips and hollows, rig and furrow in the fairways, where the drainage is going to go, all these factors. And then he's then tuned into not the golf course he was just at, but the one he's working on now. So you've got to go and look at your habitat if you're good, and then if you're really good, your work will be in that, hopefully that area where people don't believe you've done the work. How has that been done so quick? And using the indigenous grass bilberry chunking, you're not bringing in stuff from outside that looks brand new like turf. You're using the turf that's already growing there. So the comment I had, there's always one comment, and the first hole at Bodie's there is a massive bomb hole full of heather. It's frightening. It must be 25 metres deep, right?
Yeah.
And Colt said ease people into the first hole, short par 4, wideish landing area, not too much bunkering, accessible green, bogey par, nice start, birdie if you're lucky. Great start to the round. That was his ethos. Fowler, I don't know whether it's a bomb hole or whatever. It's a massive crater.
Fowler was more demanding, though, as an architect. He wanted tighter fairways. Walton Heath, he was obsessed with making it very difficult for the tee.
So basically,
good player, Fowler.
This golfer, cricketer, I think,
and he was a great cricketer.
But sadly,
as well.
I think he was a Chelsea fan.
Was he?
Or was it Tottenham? I can't. It was one of the two.
No, that would be
rubbish,
right. He grew up in London, But he was a hell of a good ball striker, so he definitely liked a tighter fairway.
But basically, when we were at Bow, this member came out and we'd done all the chunking at 18 and put, we were well out of the play, but we'd done mounding at the back. Shouldn't be in there. And he went, I don't agree with all this chunking. He says, it doesn't fit with the rest of the course. And he was walking to the first tee. I said to him, can I just ask you a question? He said, I said, do you play the first tee shot of your round with your eyes shut? I said, why? I said, because you're playing over a crater full of what the same. That's where I've got this stuff from. So it's indigenous. It's growing here, and it's nowhere near as demand. But yeah, that's what we did. But there, you've got to have. You've got to have that perception of where you're working. So if you're paying for a shaper and you see him walking around in the woods, he's actually working. Well, that's the thing. So
Mik Wells, great podcast. You're coming to our Christmas party in a couple of weeks' time.
I certainly am, yeah.
This will probably be out by then, so...
Yeah, you'll be the most popular man in town.
Well, that won't be a first.
Cheers,
Mate.
Cheers.
This